Hello and welcome. Today we're joined by the cheep of the chipmunks. It's not birds, as it sounds like, it's the chipmunks. I've just given them some food as well, it gets them awfully excited. And me too. Hello and welcome. So, comment here, curious if you've ever discussed meditation objects in detail and how to properly use a meditation object. Okay. I'm not sure to what extent I've discussed that previously. I don't keep much of a record of what any record of what I've spoken about, but the Buddha recommended 40 meditation objects. A meditation object being something to focus the attention on solely whilst sitting still, in order to bring your mind, your conscious awareness into one point, into focus, and to develop that skill, to develop more powerful concentration. This in turn enables us to practice mindfulness, that is recollection, and mindfulness or sati sampajana, which is mindfulness in all of our daily activities, everything we are doing continuously throughout our day, as well as when we're sitting. So mindfulness during our day and sati, and meditation or samadhi while sitting, with this practice of maintaining focus on one meditation object, go hand in hand together. One complements the other. So the Buddha offered for consideration 40 meditation objects, but it is 40 because some of them are variations on the same thing. So for instance, if one's using colour, as they call a kasina meditation object, so really imagining or staring even at one solid colour, there are the various different colours to make up, in fact, 10 of those 40 meditation objects. So don't be confused by so many. But when we look at the Anapanasati Sutta, and we read the suttas and understand that the Buddha's enlightenment came from practicing that, or his recollection of his practice of that, Anapanasati, mindfulness of the breath, then it is clear to me that if that was successful for the Buddha, it's what we should try first. I haven't really experienced other meditation objects. Now, these meditation objects should not be confused with recollections or the development of qualities. So we can sit and we can practice body scanning, for instance. So from the tip of the head to the tip of the toes, going through the body, noting how it all feels. But this is really going through the body and establishing a grounding and a sense of awareness towards your body prior to developing states of absorbed meditation we call samadhi. As is the development of the quality of metta, loving kindness, thinking of those you like, those you dislike, those you feel neutral about, and sending your thoughts of metta, loving kindness, towards all beings. Not in a literal sending out sense, but developing those wholesome thoughts of other beings, kind thoughts within yourself, to develop this quality of metta. This is the development of a quality. It isn't a meditation object. A meditation object can also be, or the only one I actually do ever refer to as an alternative to the breath, a single mantra, something like a 2-syllable word. From the Thai forest tradition, it's commonly used, and Thai lay people use the expression Bhutto, Bhutto. So Bhutto, which is a way of saying Buddha, but in 2 syllables, Buddho, as a reminder of the Buddha, recollecting the qualities of the Buddha, but just simply a word. You could use any word, happy or whatever is appealing to you, peace, calm, any words you can think of. This is just bringing your attention to a word or a sound that you're creating in your imagination. Now, as for whether I've spoken on detail of the other meditation objects, I haven't, I shouldn't think, because I don't use them myself, and I only really speak here of my own experience, and that is of practicing anapanasati, or mindfulness of the breath. Now, when I began meditation, I found that was the way to not only develop a relaxed body and calm state of mind at the off, because just simply sitting and watching the breath as it begins to naturally slow down, as you cease activity, mentally and physically, is a calming process in itself that I found very reassuring, and directing my thoughts towards calmness and relaxation automatically, but also could be carried with me throughout all of my daily activities. So continually being able to come back to that meditation object, whatever it is you're doing, wherever you may be, it's always with you. You don't have to conjure it up, the thought or the idea. It's just there. And it's also representative and indicative of your physical and emotional feelings in themselves. Therefore, bringing you back into the body. And the bodily experiences of comfort or discomfort, of pleasure or pain, are very present in this moment, here and now. And in meditation, this is what we're trying to achieve. Letting go of just memories of the past, and letting go of our imagination about the future, to be open to see the reality of what is. And that is the present moment, here and now, just that. It is all we have. Everything else is unreliable memory and imagination about the future. So, back to your question. I've spoken in immense detail with regards to using the breath as a meditation object. Anything other than that, I haven't probably spoken about at all, because I don't find anything other than that to be, from my own experience, particularly useful. Reflections, contemplations to help develop insight and wisdom, yes, they are important. Reflecting on the qualities of the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, reflecting on the nature of existence, anicca, dukkha, anatta, reflecting even on the 32 parts of the body, and a subha practice, the unattractive or unbeautiful nature of things we might find appealing, in order to help reduce our cravings and desires, sensual desire, a hindrance towards meditation. All of these reflections are indeed important too. These can, in fact, be incorporated into the chanting when you understand, or chant in your own language, the core sequence of Buddhist chants, which contain those reflections and also some of these teachings. That is also in itself a useful way to begin your meditation, primarily before you sit and start to focus on the breath, to practice a little chanting to help calm the mind, help relax the body. Just gives you that little bit of time to settle in. So yeah, that's as far as it goes. So limited, but my talks are limited to my own experience, which is working for me, so I share that with others. I don't want to go into exploring other alternatives when the tools I have, the Buddha has given me in the sutta, from an understanding of reading the suttas and the teachings of the Buddha, are enough. I'm not interested in expanding upon that and making my life complicated, just simplifying it to the lowest common denominator of what needs to be done to become free from suffering in this lifetime. And you mentioned that we could have 8 precepts on maybe 1 day per week, and something about how that is connected to moon phases. It sounds like something I may like to do. Could you describe how this works or works? So in Buddhist countries, the full moon day and the new moon day, here it's just a full moon day really, they call Poya day, but generally the Pali word is the Uposatha. So this is the Buddhist holy day, occurs every 15 days, the new moon, and then 15 days later the full moon. In between there are half moons. So in Thailand they have lunar observances, so they recognize the Uposatha at least once a week, because this division creates sort of 7 days between those moon phases. But in the Western world, our work, life and pattern, here for instance, it's a national holiday every full moon. So you can go to the monastery, the temple, or stay at home and decide that on those days, lunar observance days, you will keep 8 precepts rather than just the 5. And that is practical to do if you're a working person, if that's the day you have off. But if you live in the West, then it's better to treat this occasional, keeping the 8 precepts, on a day that you're not working, because otherwise it's difficult to do. So whether it's in relation to the moon, it's in relation to the moon is because that's the calendar monks use, because this was the calendar of the time of the Buddha, in the time of the Buddha, and it's just been maintained that way for monks because we don't need to rely on any other form of calendar. We don't have such a schedule to link in with the outside world so much that to be affected by it we can just stick to the lunar observance days. It's enough. So every 15 days before the full moon, the day before, and the day before the new moon, I take that day to do a little bit of extra robe cleaning, washing, dyeing if necessary. That is the day I usually shave my head, and this is the calendar I work to. But if you want to adopt the 8 precepts, so 5 precepts are simply no killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, or taking of intoxicants. If you want to expand that to 8 precepts, the 3rd precept changes to celibacy, so no sexual activity whatsoever. And then in addition to it, you have number 6, you do not eat in the afternoon. Number 7, you don't use jewellery, perfumes, garlands, or engage in any entertainment. And number 8, you don't sleep in a high and luxurious sleeping place. It's just once a week or once a month, or a time when it's suitable for you to practice those extra precepts. With regards to the 8th, the sleeping in a high and luxurious place, it's a little ambiguous. I usually refer to that or take it to mean as don't sit around on the sofa all day. Even if you're keeping the other 7 precepts, sitting on comfortable chairs, lazing around isn't really part of the practice. So make it a day just to use the floor as the place where you sit. But more often than not, towards the end of the day, you'll probably need to go back to your ordinary place to sleep at night. It doesn't have to be that specifically adhered to. And But for monks, we have these precepts incorporated into our 227 rules all of the time. So we are not allowed to sleep in high luxurious sleeping places. Although, monks often these days do have beds, there is a limit to how tall the legs can be, and they don't normally have too thicker mattresses, if any at all. I tend to just sleep on the floor, sit on the floor, live on the floor, eat on the floor. I like this floor living. I've got used to it over many years of living in Asia, and found that it creates energy and awakeness that is not maintained when lazing around in comfortable chairs. And once you get used to it, which yes does take some time, it's actually a much more practical way of living. As you can see, I have very much more space and simplicity. You think how much room a bed takes up in your house. I got rid of my bed some 10 years ago when I first took the 8 precepts in a small flat where I was living at the time. And then when I got rid of the bed, gave it to someone, it was fairly new, so I gave it away. I found all of a sudden I had this lovely big room which I could practice walking meditation in. From corner to corner I could get about 10 strides, which is just about enough. So a lot more space. How does it work for people in general? Yeah, just take an opportunity once a week, maybe Sunday if that's an appropriate day, to turn the phones off, don't have any entertainment, don't eat in the afternoon, it's not necessary, and just stay in your comfortable lounging around clothes. There's no need to adorn yourself with jewellery and makeup and hairdos. Just take it easy and practice meditation for the entire day. And noble silence can be just incorporated into that also. This dog's not very cooperative this morning. Now it does this in the night quite a bit as well, and bearing in mind I don't sleep for many hours, it can be a bit of a problem. Get a bit tired. Thank you. Right. The same question keeps coming up about this person dying if you don't tell a lie. I think I, for some reason, don't delete it or something. We've dealt with that anyway, thoroughly. What I have been taught from my understanding... What I've been taught, and from my understanding, animals cannot meditate because they don't have the ability to develop sama samadhi. I wonder who has specifically taught you that, because it's an unusual thing to teach anyone, isn't it? Animals, the animal realm is how animals think, what's going through their minds, what they can and cannot do. I mean, I just don't know. If you watch animals, and they're great to observe. A lot of the Chinese martial arts, for instance, originate from the movements and actions of animals and different ways of mimicking their behavior. Because watching animals stalk their prey, a cat chasing a mouse, for instance, or waiting for a mouse, it is a very focused and concentrated and highly developed form of mindfulness, but not, as you correctly say, samasati, because of course their ultimate aim is to kill, much like a marksman aiming a gun, having to really steady the body and the mind and the focus for a long distance shot. If his crosshairs are on another being in order to take life, then this is very much not right mindfulness, but it is mindfulness, sati. Samasati is right mindfulness. And with samadhi, sama samadhi, it is with a view to developing focus of attention on one object, like I was just describing, for the mind to become calm, and you to develop these absolute insights into the characteristics of existence and the Dharma, to become able to see these clearly, to become awakened. Now, in the absence of hearing the Dharma, understanding the Dharma, then that mightn't necessarily happen, because there's nothing to explain what it is. You will see eventually the impermanence of everything. You'll see the suffering, but whether you'll have the wisdom in that to determine not self, and that everything's suffering and everything's impermanent, is in the absence of any Buddha's teachings, hard to know. Now, in the case of the Buddha, who's described as the perfectly enlightened one, because he had no Buddhist teachings, no Dharma, and was able to develop this insight for himself, thus become awakened and thus become the Buddha. Since when we've had the Dharma and his teachings, so in the human realm we know the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. And if we don't, we might be seeing something that we will inquire about and be pushed in that direction towards Dharma as being the explanation to why things are impermanent, suffering and out of our control. Whereas if you're in the animal realm, so you're a cat or a dog or a mouse, and you can just sit and seemingly be in a state of samadhi, absorbed meditation, it could be just a deep state of relaxation. We don't know what's going on in their minds. But what we do know is that it's very difficult to appreciate the Dharma in terms of the convention of language and word if you're in the animal realm, possibly. But none of us really know that for sure. But it is said that the animal realm is far more difficult to escape because you do not have the access to the Dharma. But certainly I believe, and I only believe, I don't know, that dogs, cats, animals living around temples and monasteries and inside temples and monasteries amongst monks whom are harmless to them, and often those animals develop a harmless respect in return. So even poisonous snakes, poisonous spiders, scorpions and all kinds of other insects that creep and crawl around become less harmless because they're knowing they're not having to protect themselves from you. So they, whether they know it or not, seem to be offering that same respect. Therefore, these animals also, if they're fed, less need to hunt, have more likelihood and ability to break free from that realm ultimately. But that's just my belief and theory behind these ideas. So whether they can have sama samadhi, I don't know. But samadhi, very possibly. I know for sure that this Rosie cat here will sit and meditate with me, and seemingly her breathing slows, heart rate slows. She's alert and awake, because if you make a sound, she'll be there to know that you're making that sound. She'll react. So she's not asleep, but she will stay absolutely still. In fact, in the night, she came and sat on me the other night, and I was kind of awake, but then I drifted off to sleep, and I woke up and she was still sitting on my feet. She sort of sits on my feet because I don't move about much in the night. So she just, but was very motionless, and I thought, oh no, she's died, because she was totally not moving. So I kind of looked, because it was a full moon, and the windows and doors are sort of open here, so there's moonlight, and I could just see her silhouette. But her head wasn't laying down, it was up, looking. But she was totally motionless, but with her head up. So she was awake, but deeply absorbed state of relaxation, to the extent that I did think she was dead. And I did move, and she didn't. So I was a little concerned, but then she did move, and it was okay. But, that's not necessarily sama samadhi. You're quite right. Whoever's taught you that, I don't think it's wrong. I don't think it's right. All right, Bante. Oh, this is animals again. How lovely. Bante, as a forest monk who lives in a village, how do you deal with wild forest animals? So I kind of live in the villagey forest. It's not like a deep forest like I was in Thailand, or they have here. It's not jungle. It's a small bit of woodland. There are other buildings around that are, most of them are empty buildings, but there's a couple of households not too far from. So I'm not isolated that far into the jungles here. So there aren't really tigers or bears or whatever, or elephants that they may have deep inland in the jungles here. for me to deal with. But I've had this experience previously. There's nothing to deal with. You just accept this is their home. You are their guest. And this is the way to always be. As a monk, it's in our nature to have little, to make no impression on the surroundings other than of a positive nature if we can. So I always leave where I've stayed either improved, but not too much. Don't change an environment. So better than when I left. Never leave a mark or a mess. So if you even pitch a little mosquito net or a tent on the ground and you take it away, if it's left a flat area, I'd shuffle up the leaves a bit just to make it so as it looks as if no one's been there. But this is also the way we behave in our activities. So like I was just saying, the other animals around will pick up and sense that you are keeping precepts. And you only have to keep 5 precepts for other beings to appreciate and know and sense that you will cause, as you're causing no harm to yourself, you are not going to cause any harm to any other beings. And in that sense, with that sense, they feel less need to protect themselves against you and leave you alone. Now there are snakes, there are many spiders and creatures that come in here. The big water monitor things can give you a nasty bite if you upset them. And it's come in here a couple of times, but it just wanders out again when it notices me or I notice it. And things can come and go freely in and out of this building as they could previously when it was an empty building. So I've made no difference to where they live, and I'm not playing music or TV or radios or anything like that, and I don't have any phone sounds going off, notifications, any of this kind of stuff that might cause animals in the surrounding area to react. So the biggest thing that happens around here is your tuk-tuk might go down the track because it's taken a wrong turning or someone's gone the wrong way or it's delivering something down the way there. But for my own presence, I try to be invisible. So there's nothing to deal with regards to wild forest animals. Occasionally the monkeys will come. They just run around. Local people might shoo them off a bit because they can be a bit destructive, throw all the coconuts down before they're ready, and also those in turn can cause some damage, so I can understand why. But I just watch them with interest and until they go. But here it's just insects and snakes and rats and things like that. And this cat is semi-wild. She's my lion, my tiger. Okay. Could you let us know what are the pluses and minuses of practicing pretty much alone, as you do, or in living in a communal situation in a monastery with a coordinated lifestyle and group practice? I know that if I were a monk, I'd think I'd much prefer following the options you have, but it'd be interesting to know your views and experiences. Okay, so I'm not going to really do a pros and cons list. I'm not really good at inventing lists, and there isn't one that comes to mind that the Buddha's already produced for us with numbers, but when you ordain, you have to stay in a monastic community, that of monks if you're a monk, or nuns if you're a nun, for 5 years. So there's no choice, you have to. This is your training period. And before you can ordain, you have to live with that community for probably a minimum of 2 years, 1 to 2 years. So you've spent 7 years living in a community of monks. So this isn't it, I'm afraid. You might think this is an option. You just go and you're a monk and you live here. No, it requires a lot of skills to be learned. Someone was asking me to talk about the skills needed to live in the wild. Now, I'm not the person to teach that. There are many, probably if you look and search, many videos about how to live in the wild. You'll probably find that they all incorporate special items of clothing, footwear, special types of rucksack, bags, tools, special knives, torches, ways to power things, ways to have fires, ways to carry water, purify water, protect you from mosquitoes. You end up with suitcases and suitcases full of baggage to go into the so-called wild. It seems to defeat the object. Whereas you learn in monastic life, living in community, to live with very little. And if you should choose at the end of that 5 years to go and live alone, then you still have just 8 requisites. Your 3 robes, your lower robe, upper robe and outer robe, your bowl, your belt, your razor, your needle and cotton and your water filter. These are the only 8 things we own. Anything other than that is merely just borrowed for the time being. This phone I'm recording this video on is borrowed from yourselves who have paid for it by your kind donations. I don't claim particular ownership to it, but I will take care of it as it's being lent to me for this purpose and take it to my next place, because as long as it fits in my bowl, inside my bowl, along with my passport and my plane tickets and my visa paperwork and anything of such a toothbrush, for instance, which is an optional and extra these days, then it goes with me. I also carry around a metal cup and spoon, which I find terribly useful as well. These are extras over and above our 8 requisites. So when you can live like that, you're ready to live anywhere, whether it's in a busy monastery with 100 monks, as I have done for the last few years, off and on. My own monastery back in Bangalore in southern India has 100 monks, but also many other branches where I went to, which are just a few monks, or I was alone even for some time, in a little vihara, a branch of that particular Sangha in that country, in India. So there are very many options open to you. As for pros and cons, we all practice and need different levels of varying support. It's not for me to say. Personally, and from my experience of all the monasteries I've stayed in, they are usually what we refer to as training monasteries. So there are places where you need to go and spend your first 5 years as an ordained bhikkhu anyway, and therefore are being trained to be able to go and live alone. And they are therefore facilitated for such training of what are lay people coming into monastic life. And therefore all the support is given that's necessary to assist you in that process, in that you have very senior monks whom are also very good teachers to help you learn the Dharma, both in the sense that I'm talking about usually here, but also the technical sides of the Pali language, the Vinaya Pitaka, which is all of the rules, the complex thousands of rules that there are. I refer to 227 precepts, the Patimokkha, but in the Vinaya there are thousands of other rules to actually where they come from, those 227 specific precepts or rules. For nuns that is 311, there's slightly more. But this is very important that you have this background and training. So if you want to learn to go and live in the wild, you just go and learn to live in the wild. But I'm not sure it's that successful. But if you are and have learned to become a monk living in community with very little, you're already mentally, and you only need to be mentally, equipped to go out and live anywhere, whether it's in a bus shelter in the middle of a hustling, bustling city. And I've spent many a night in bus shelters in hustling, bustling cities of India and all over the place really, many airport floors, or whether it's in the forest or on the beach. You are mentally prepared because after all, you're sitting, you're meditating. Location is not so important. Even in sensory deprivation, where there is no sound, no distraction, no noise, there is always your mind. This is the biggest noise and hindrance we have to deal with. So there are no specific pros and cons in that respect. You might think living alone in solitude is completely peaceful. Well, it's not. I mean, you've just heard this dog barking. It will bark very loud, much more loudly than that during my meditation. I've got used to it to some extent now. And during the night when I'm trying to sleep, or people could just walk in. They don't tend to here. It's a Buddhist country. But in India, they just walk in with no idea of personal space or invading of such personal space. It's just the door's open and you're an open invitation. So there's all of these other things to contend with. What is important is you're following the Noble Eightfold Path wherever you are. And it isn't all monasteries where you are able to practice a long time or so much formal sitting meditation. Now, with regards to communal, a coordinated lifestyle and group practice, well, I still have the same monastic routine that was adopted by me years ago. I took on in the first monastery I stayed in, is the same routine each and every day wherever I am. Even if I'm in a different monastery, unless, to some extent, I still keep to waking at 3, meditating till 6, morning puja, that's time varies in different monasteries, going on alms round, eating my meal, cleaning up, then free. Then in monasteries you might have some work duties in the afternoon, you'll have some evening puja, ceremonies, chanting, group meditation to practice, but I follow that routine, but just alone. There is nothing else, no other duties for me to do. Living in communities, they are set up to facilitate training. They also are there and receptive to guests. Now, a lot of people have been, or recently a few people have asked me, could they come and stay here to meditate with me? Can they visit? Well, I'm always welcoming visitors whom are passing through, whom are here in this area anyway. And they are very welcome to come and talk and have a chat, ask some questions, talk about meditation. However, I am staying here alone. I don't have any guest facilities, not even a toilet you can use. I have my own toilet facilities, but I don't share that with others. We're not in accordance with the Vinaya supposed to, other than with other monks. We have separate toilet facilities and bathing facilities to lay people. Lay people can't stay with me either as a bhikkhu. A close friend, an assistant lay person, or even a family member, then even is only allowed to stay with me in under the same roof for a maximum of 3 nights. Then they have to go and find their own accommodation. When my son came to visit me here last year, he stayed in accommodation, up the road somewhere that he found himself, and visited me at appropriate times in the day. Likewise knowing he couldn't come here and use the toilet or charge his phone up or store his luggage, because I have no such facilities for such. But communities, monasteries, training monasteries have all these facilities. So if you look up meditation facilities or places to meditate for lay people at monasteries in this country or other countries, there will be plenty of those. So I can't even say I'd love to be able to offer that, because I wouldn't. If I wanted to offer that kind of experience for people, then I'd live back in a monastery where I have all the support and the bathrooms and the rooms and the accommodation and all of the people running around cooking the food, preparing the rooms and preparing in the way of very junior monks or semineras and lay people staying there looking to become monks, who would help with all of that, supporting those lay people in their practice. And as lay people in your practice, you need that support. So you can't just come and drop here and start meditating with me, because what happens when you need to go to the toilet or when something bites you? Then the whole routine has to be adapted around that, and really out of compassion, it would be important that I have all the facilities in place for any such visitors. So it is better when you're practicing alone to just be practicing alone. And when living in a community, to be living in a community, accepting that you cannot meditate all day long, because there are, when offering those facilities for either training or for guests, are duties to be done. There is work. Whenever there's more than one, there's 2, 3 or upwards of that, there's a lot of work to do. You might say, well, it's shared though, there's more people in a community sharing the work. Well, if you live alone, the work's not there in the first place. Once I've washed my bowl after my meal, there's nothing for me to do whatsoever. I have to really think of stuff like, oh, I'm going to sweep the floor. It probably doesn't even need sweeping, because the lay people around here sweep all of the foresty bit outside there every day so beautifully. I can't do that. I do sweep my own veranda, but this, rarely, once or twice a day is more than enough. And I sweep the cobwebs as carefully as I can without disturbing any insect life. But I let the breeze blow through to keep the dust down and keep it clean. And it's a very simple life with no chores and no tasks. So this is one of the pros of living alone to practice. Whereas the cons of living in a monastery would be that you're going to have 2 o'clock till 4 o'clock in the afternoon every day, seeing the work monk who's going to give you your duties. You're cleaning this, you're maintaining that, you're fixing this. There are all sorts of jobs that need to be done to look after all the things that have been offered as well by the lay people. The stupas that have been built, even the building of those stupas is a lot of involved work. I've been involved in Thailand in laying foundations, special ways we do this as monks in these different traditions of burying relics and building stupas. There's a lot of work involved and a lot of thought that goes into it, and coordination and ceremonial process. And I was very disinterested in all of that right from the very early stages, and took the earliest opportunity to go it alone as I possibly could. But many people, that doesn't suit. They prefer the security and comfort of monastic life. And unless you're very well established in your practice. Now, I had been practicing alone before I ordained, but on the 8 precepts for many years previously, and prior to that I had lived outside and alone as a homeless person for many years also, practicing a kind of homemade hermit life or self-taught hermit life of simplicity, which I kind of had learnt from some other sources that I gleaned, namely a wonderful book I read called Walden, which I'd recommend anyone reads. I never put this on my books of recommended reading, or even remember to say it when someone asks me. But if you're watching this video and you haven't read Walden by Thoreau, who's an American philosopher of many years ago, hundreds of years ago now, 19th, 20th century, I don't know, 1800s, 1900s, maybe 1930s even, I don't know. Long time ago since I read it, hasten to add. But his idea, some people refer to it as probably the most boring book, because it's his description of sitting alone, doing nothing, watching, observing, boredom. Now that does sound boring, doesn't it? And that is the nature of this very long book. Read it. And that is almost, apart from some very obvious things, like he goes and steals his food rather than goes on Pindapata, it's his only option, and he has to do gardening and growing his own provisions. But until he could do that, he had to go and steal. But this book, Walden, Thoreau, is where I learned a lot of skills of how to live alone, outside, with little, before I encountered Buddhism. I'd embarked on this practice of renunciation before, and it was somewhat forced upon me in some senses of the word, but also very much out of choice, because once I found myself looking for somewhere else to live, and out in a forest one night I stayed there thinking, wait, this is great. But it is by the by. we're talking here about Buddhist practice, and at its one extreme is monastic life, but the other level, and it's by no means better or worse, is lay life or monastic life. And then the Buddha, as monastics, said we can live in a community, in a monastery, or we can live alone. This is the choice. But when living alone, we live in an empty building, or under a tree, or in a cave, or just in the open air. These are the options. So you've got two main options: in a community in a monastery, or with other monks, or if you're a nun, with other nuns, or you live alone, but only in those environments, not alone in a house with bathrooms and kitchens and conservatories, no. Not in a hotel, no. In an empty old building like this was, and still is really, under a tree, literally, or just in a cave or in the open air. Now, I lived for a couple of years, mostly in the open air in India, because you can, nobody minds. And, you know, apart from wild dogs, or not wild dogs, but, you know, stray dogs, nothing much came to bother me at night. And I enjoyed it as a very suitable place to practice and way of living. But that environment was conducive to it. You can't do that in, perhaps, if you're living in New York or London, Paris or Rome. It's probably not even legal these days in many parts of my own country, England. I know when I was living in a van on the beach for many years, 3 years exactly, in fact, but 3 years in one spot on that particular beach, isn't allowed now. You can't even park there without paying a huge amount of money for a few hours. But so things change. But within the scope of Buddhism, those are your options. So there's no saying what's best and it's up to us. But if you're a monk, then you have to do the training first, and it does take, I usually say, about 7 years. And I think you can become a doctor also in the same sort of time it takes to become a doctor. Maybe I'm wrong there, maybe it takes a lot longer to become a doctor, but still 7 years is a long time to practice and learn something, and you do and have developed the skills or the mind to cope with living anywhere in that time. If you haven't, you can just stay in the community. And some people also continue with their own skills. So maybe they're good teachers, they're intellectual, maybe they are practical, or they're IT people. So in many monasteries, especially like in Thailand, they have monks who have roles there that are work orientated. So a plumbing monk, a building monk, an IT monk, a guest monk, teaching monks they have all over the place, teaching educational curriculums of local governments to school children whom happen to be Samanera monks, but it's still teaching. So they have a lot of work to do. They are monks, but they have, to some extent, similar lives to that on the outside world, but in robes, in some monasteries. Others are more just practice orientated. Where in the forest monastery I lived in Thailand, a couple of years back when I was there, you can see the videos on here, I was just on my own in the forest, really. We only got together for alms round, and once in the afternoon at 4, and the meal after that, and once in the afternoon at 4 o'clock for the puja, in the afternoon for the chanting. When the Mei-chis would come, that's the nuns, and the local people might come, a few would come to that. But other than that, we were alone in a kuti in the forest. So that's as close to living alone as you can get these days, really, in Thailand, because you're generally expected to live with a sangha under an abbot and with your teacher for a lot longer than 5 years, usually a minimum of 10 there. Then I'm not sure how I'm doing with time, but it's kind of related. So I'm going to move on with the next question and hope that I haven't, maybe you can pause it and come back to the video later if I go a long time over. So I'll read it as it is also. So just check I've answered that properly. Yeah, as best I can anyway. Also, and the following, not in any way a loaded question. Well, that's enough to make you worried, isn't it, before you read the question? It's when people say, with all due respect, you know they mean absolutely, or generally, they're not offering they don't say it to me, but we've all said this, haven't we? With all due respect, it means with no respect whatsoever, I think you're wrong, doesn't it? But anyway, that's aside. I'm not trying to be provocative. Again, I'm thinking, yes, I think you probably are. Or gender prejudiced. Why do you think it is taking so long for a bhikkhuni-led sangha to emerge and gain popularity as Dharma teacher guides amongst the lay people? Of course, I know in the Mahayana Sangha in Korea and Taiwan, women already have established themselves. I mean in the Theravada Sangha. Why is it that men are overwhelmingly more popular as teachers? Again, it's not a loaded question. I just don't know what the answer is, and I'm curious as to an ordained person's view. Okay, so what you're saying is, why are there more bhikkhus than bhikkhunis? Bhikkhuni is a female bhikkhu, a nun, as opposed to a monk. I use monks and nuns and don't really go much with this whole gender-neutral monastic terminology, because we are not that gender-neutral. We're very old-fashioned. We have to live separately. It's in our Vinaya, which has maintained the Sangha's existence for 2,500 years. And if it's going to for the next 2,500 years, that Vinaya has to be maintained. Any adaptations on that Vinaya, and there have been many, those Sanghas or so-called Sanghas that have been born out of those adaptations are either diminishing or have gone. And many more will arise and many more will come and go. But the main Sangha, adherent to the Vinaya, the legacy of the Buddha, as is in his words on his death, was his legacy is the Vinaya Pitaka, the rules and regulations for monks and nuns. In order to set a good example for lay people, this legacy, whilst maintained, has lasted and will last. So monks are separate from nuns, because nuns are women and monks are men. And when men and women get together, well, I don't need to give you a lesson on the birds and bees. It is unnecessary temptation, so they're separate. Now, I don't know the history of bhikkhunis specifically. There are many talks on this subject, so I'm not sure particularly why I'm being asked this question, but my understanding is that the bhikkhuni lineage, the first bhikkhuni being the stepmother of the Buddha, and the lineage thereafter, so the lineage of nuns comes from the stepmother of the Buddha, the lineage of monks comes from the lineage of the Buddha. So literally, one monk to another, ordaining to another. After the Buddha ordained a stepmother, the bhikkhunis were not allowed to be ordained by a man thereafter. They would have to be ordained by another bhikkhuni, another lady. So it's kept them separate in all that time. This is when the Vinaya was being created, so there was a little flexibility at that time. But since it was stayed. So for that reason, because they kind of ran out of ladies, I think the bhikkhuni lineage it is understood, die out. And it is subsequently, by some means or another, and I won't go into that, it's not the point of the question, being revived. So consequently, there are more bhikkhus, monks, than there are bhikkhunis, nuns. So just by the very nature of numbers, simple mathematics, that's why there are a lot more Buddhist monk teachers than there are Buddhist nun teachers in any tradition, really. But specifically in Theravada, because that's where they treat this lineage aspect of bhikkhus and bhikkhunis very specifically. Now also, in addition to that, there is in all organizations, You could say in organised religion, but I would say just generally in all organisations, until very, very recently, in the whole scheme of things, has been, what do they call it, misogynist, anyway, patriarchal, male-orientated direction. It's always been men at the top and leaders and women at the bottom, subservient to men. Now, I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong. I'd say it's probably very wrong. But that's the way it is, has been, rather, in large organisations. So similarly, in religious organisations, that's even more felt and more obvious. I mean, you take the Catholic Church, nuns, there are many Catholic nuns, but they're hidden away. But if you look in the Vatican, the popes, the cardinals, all of the high-ups, they're only just allowing now women vicars, women priests, women bishops. I think there may be even a women or female bishop, only very recently. So again, you know, it's just history and the way things are. And how it's changing will take time. So this is just why. Now, whether it's right, whether it's wrong, that doesn't really matter. If you are a female now wanting to practice, you can go and find bhikkhuni training monasteries like I was just describing for men. There should not be, there will not be mixed monasteries. Now, I say that and I don't mind saying that. You can have them, to some extent, there's going to be mixed coordinated areas, but the accommodation aspect of it and the living community has to be single sex. Because a lot of our work is, especially in the training stages, and for younger men and younger women, is very orientated around the reduction of sensual desire, including sexual desire. And the problems in relationships, even without sexual relations, between men and women, is such that even for this topic to be being discussed is evidence that it's provocative of unwholesome and unnecessary conversation. So just keep the men in one place and the women in another. Now in Thailand, where it's very much, they don't have nuns, they have mechis, they don't have bhikkhunis, they are some now, yes, so much. It's very much a male-orientated thing. They're actually very accepting of that environment. There is no argument with that. The mechis will live within monastery grounds in their own accommodation, but they're going to be doing a lot of cooking and cleaning and things that a lot of modern day ladies aspiring to become nuns would find as work that's, you know, they shouldn't be having to do for men, and can see it that way. This is up to them in their view. But there, it's considered very different and of a great privilege to be able to do that. As far as lay women or mechis are concerned, mechi cow and arahant of the of Ajahn Man and Ajahn Mahabodhi's time, I think, but not a student of his. Maybe she was a student of him, I can't quite remember now, I get my generations mixed up. But of that lineage was an arahant and a mechi. And if I'd had the opportunity to listen to her teachings, I've certainly read her biography, I would have been mostly inspired by them. I was inspired by her biography. She's a female, but she was a mechi and she lived with other, alone mostly, but when living in a community, lived with other women. It makes no difference. It's the teachings, the Dharma that matter. What we're wearing, what sex we are, is just form. It is irrelevant. And most of the people whom have arguments against this separation are using that as the argument. Well, it's irrelevant, but then turning it around negatively. We still have attraction towards the opposite sex. You cannot change that. You can understand it, and you can use it in your training to understand the nature of desire, and you can eradicate your defilements which this would come under greed, so sensual desire and greed, by means of intensive practice. And this does involve separation from that opposite sex, guarding of the senses. You ask at the end, why is there an overwhelmingly more men? Well, it's just, maths. There are very few, by comparison to the number of monks throughout history that there have been, and even that there are now, the number of bhikkhus, that is, the number of nuns, bhikkhunis, is very few. So that's why there are fewer teachers. But a couple of my original teachers, or people whom I've learned from, I didn't live with them, of course, but I've been to their Dharma talks, I've visited their monasteries because they were associated with my own, where I was staying at the time, were nuns, or samaniris they were called at the time, not bhikkhunis, but 10 precept nuns, and varying levels of different precepts, nuns that have inspired me in their talks, by their example, in my own activities, without having to have any form of real direct association or contact, other than in the sense of them giving a Dharma talk and me being with other males sitting on one side of the room with females of the audience on the other side of the room. Thus, even as lay people, then separated by that. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know what you expect me to sort of jump up and give a big argument for the pros and cons against bhikkhuni organisations or for it. It's not something I've really had cause to give a great deal of consideration to. There are organisations. There is the Bhikkhuni Anukampa organisation in the UK, set up by Ajahn Brahm, a Thai forest monk in this lineage who is in Australia, set up by Ajahn Chanda, with the backing of Ajahn Brahm, who is very instrumental in bringing back bhikkhuni ordination into this modern world. And she is doing very good work there, I believe, establishing a place for training in the West for bhikkhunis of the future. And that is a very wonderful thing that's being done, a very good thing indeed. She's also a very good teacher, a modern day teacher, outside of what you were saying, the Mahayana traditions. Anyway, I should think that's probably sufficient time spoken for now. And hope if there's something useful there you can use it. If not, let it go. Don't let it worry you. Don't let it bother you. And don't please send me an email telling me how wrong I am. You can if it's just that, but I don't need to hear your explanation as to all of the alternative things I could be talking about, because I really just talk about Sila, Samadhi, Panya, and Anicca, Dukkha, Anatta. And that is the practice, that is the wisdom. The Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path, or the Four Noble Truths, which incorporates the Noble Eightfold Path, is what we need in order to become free from suffering in this lifetime. So be happy and stay well. Until next time, Sukhi Hotu.